here to kick things off, so to speak, and I want you all to welcome Dave King here.
So I assume this is more than percussion.
Yeah.
So I was slightly unprepared for that. I keep forgetting, does Dane teach like more, it's not just drums, runs ensembles and things, and how's that work with him?
He runs the percussion department,
Yeah.
so he teaches all the percussion students. He runs ensembles, but they're mostly percussion ensembles, so like Afro-Cuban, Kinkavio, which is West African, and then somebody says it's like Brazilian type stuff.
Right.
And then concert.
Right. That's his thing. Okay, we won't cover any Brazilian or West African stuff today then.
Yeah.
It's all taken care of. Thank God. Okay, cool. But is the main focus improvising musicians, or some classical musicians here, or interpretive artists of any variety? Mostly like jazz and whatnot? Okay, cool. And then how many drummers? I mean, just so you know what's going on there. Okay, so quite a few. Very cool. All right. Well, one thing that Dane talked to me about a little bit is to talk a little bit about not only like the idea of a career in improvised music or creative music or whatever, but also personalizing your approach, sound and things like that. All instruments, of course. So and kind of what goes into that and whatever. So I guess one of the questions I have is are most people familiar with some of the music that I've played, or okay, so all right, so shoot, I was hoping it would be a big surprise as to my limitations. Okay, well, I think kind of the easiest way to go about it, since we only have like an hour or so, is if there are any just questions right away that I can sort of go down what road, drum related or not drum related. I also write a lot of music, so I also play piano, so there's, you know, my experience goes a little bit beyond the sort of, you know, role of just an instrumentalist. Is everyone, how many people here also compose music, like along with, so some people already? Cool. Any drummers that compose music? All right, cool. All right. Yeah, it is. I've already really blown it. We were just getting really heavy into West African stuff just now. Now you're here. And I'm really nervous about, you know. Anyway, thank you, Dave. I also know that you've got the pianist Bill Carruthers has now been spending some time down here, right? He was telling me he wasn't going to be here today. Right. I was going to spend about a half hour on that, just relating to Bill as a person, and 30 to 45 minutes of just trying to get inside what Bill's all about socially, as well as
pretty wicked.
Politically. Okay. Bill's not as scary as it seems up front. Okay, well, yeah, maybe I'll just ask if there's any general question, you know, that anyone can think of right away about, you know, that you just have in general about what we do, this band tonight, or what I'm doing, or what the world of the creative music world is all, you know, as a career. Yes?
Well, I've heard the Bad Plus described as like punk jazz, and I also heard you say that like you have this punk mentality, but you do it less obviously. I've heard you say, so like I was wondering if you could just like elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, elaborate on that. I mean, sometimes there's quotes and things that can be a little bit like, you know, obviously there's hyperbole involved in some of these things. I know what moment you're talking about too is in the making of our latest record. I, in fact, saw the edit of that film, and I was like, well, there was a lot more going on there in that discussion, but of course that's the quote. Obviously, what I mean by the energy or a punk ethos would come out of the idea that band is kind of comprised of people that, for the most part, had an attitude, almost like an iconoclastic way of being as separate entities. We were, three of us, not the most hireable in the world of, let's say, like a side person or side man world or whatever you want to call it. In jazz, we were coming out of our, you know, late teens, early 20s when we first started playing together. It was a long time ago, actually. We started playing together 10 years before the band actually existed. In fact, I know Ethan and you worked together way back then. You could, he was very excited that you were here too.
Yeah, I can't wait to see him.
Yeah, he was really like, wow. I was like, but I think you can then vouch for me when you say that Ethan was quite a precocious, rule breaker, as it were. Not that he didn't have all of it together, but really, it kind of, that whole idea of learning the rules and then breaking the rules, whatever, is a very muddy concept and kind of an easy statement. But I think the rule breakers are kind of born that way, and then you try your best to kind of grab as many rules as you can on the way down while you're bursting in flames and stuff. And I think the three of us, especially Ethan and I, kind of come from that mentality right away. So when I use that, I mean that we sort of have a willingness, like a do-it-yourself willingness, a self-taught meeting, however else we've learned via teachers and osmosis and all these other concepts of, you know, apprenticeship, that we've always had a part of us that's questions what the easiest road is, or questions what the moment, the rational approach in a moment. So in many ways, the Bad Plus is almost kind of like an art project. I know that sounds very pretentious, but it's less of like a band that you'd think of where there's somebody that kind of has more ideas than another person, and then or a leader, or someone that's like, and then this is what the drum does in this moment, and this is what the piano does. It's much more of like three people that happen to play those instruments that are also three composers, three conceptual type thinkers, coming together and kind of leaving your willingness to want to lead it, steer it, play your normal roles within the band, and you start to trade those ideas, and it becomes a little ecosystem of itself.
Is that how it's kind of spread across other bands like Happy Apple?
Yeah, but more with the Bad Plus than any of my other projects, because Happy Apple, where it has tends to have very, again, iconoclastic thinkers. It's less absolute leader iconoclastic thinkers than the Bad Plus is. Bad Plus is leader type A people that have somehow been able to function together very long, you know what I mean? Whereas the Bad Plus, you know, I mean, Happy Apple, the other guys actually in Happy Apple wouldn't mind me saying, I kind of lead that band. Even though they contribute music, they're both almost a little bit more, they're less like the person that's going to break through the door first type person as people. And so you have that thing with the Bad Plus where we've always been surprised at how long we keep going with it. And not because there's ever tension because of that. It's just an interesting alchemy of personality, like that we realize the specialness of having the ability to have three kind of leaders exist together. And that's why I call it kind of like an art project. It's almost like art movements you'd read about where you have like figureheads of art movements, like abstract expressionists. You've got these guys and they're hanging out, and men and women hanging out together, making a certain statement, and they're almost doing it together, putting on shows together and things like that. That's kind of how we look at the band. You know, that's why it keeps evolving in a way that someone will have a new idea that makes it go a certain direction for a little while, and everyone's okay with that. It's like we share it. So, but that's what I kind of mean with the punk ethos. I don't mean, of course, that we're, you know, like, attempting to, number one, be much younger than we are, and but we do kind of pride ourselves in a youthful sense of play in that band. You know, the idea of that it's a restless thinking group, if that answers your question. I give long answers. I'm sorry about that. We might just be doing this 3 questions today, and then let's go get something to eat.
Yeah, that's even better.
Yeah.
I have a few questions, actually. This might be a dissertation. What are some of your influences as a percussionist and as a composer? And I forgot the second one, so I'll
Okay, well, you'll have plenty of time to remember. Influences as a percussionist, I mean, you know, that's a question you get asked, you know, and it's nice to actually be in a forum to be able to actually answer it somewhat intelligently instead of like, you know, you're doing like a 10-minute whatever radio thing or something. Who are your favorite drummers? It's just like, oh my God, you know, I'm just like, it's a horrifying thing to think about that you leave people out. Again, I've always tended to gravitate towards musicians as a whole, not just drummers, to be inspired by number one. Of the person that sort of is a part of whatever's happening. It doesn't matter if it's rock, jazz, you know, if it's a contemporary classical composer. There's something where the element is, where the drum is a part of the statement, absolutely. Like it's not playing a role, and I don't mean a role where it's like egotistical and it's maximalist, you know, like needing to do too much all the time type role. I mean a sound, a way of interacting where you can't imagine that music without it. In fact, I was just having this conversation lately with an interviewer about the idea that I've been feeling lately that rock music, for instance, I've been looking for that personality behind the drums in rock music, like that you would hear in The Police, for instance, where it's an instantaneous relationship from the way the drum sounds and is being played with the band. There is no separation of the sound of that band without that guy playing drums, okay? And how influential that was, how amazing that is today, for me anyway, to still check in on going, wow, I was just listening to The Police like a few days ago and just realizing that it's just so masterful. It's just like, wow, that is really remarkable drumming, you know? And it's not overpowering anyone, it's not doing anything, it's just purely personality-driven sound, incredible technique, all these things, without it being like fusion-y, muscle, macho, you know. I'm sorry if that offends any like heavy fusion guys here. Actually, I do want to offend you if that's what you're doing. But you know, that type of thing. I'm looking for that today. So that would be one of the people like Stuart Copeland of The Police, if you're talking about rock, but also just the absolute domination of what the drum can do within a simple pop song or a structure that's just like a radio hit or something. You just have this incredible like pocket or whatever. And you can of course go back to great Motown session work and all these other things to find the greatest pockets and all these things, but not the amount being played that still sounds like it's not overpowering anyone. You know what I mean? So I'll take John Bonham and Led Zeppelin, for instance, as another example of like where is that level of masterful feel, sound, the idea of the sound. Dane and I were just discussing that before, like someone paying attention to their sound so deeply. It's not an accident, you know what I mean? It's not like an ignorant statement of just like, wow, and there's an absolute control over aesthetic, okay? Now in jazz, I can name a million people, and then I can really name as many today that you might not even heard of, that when you see them play, it's an absolutely like personal experience. You know, I mean, I have my opinions about where jazz fits in the cultural perspective of today. I have some probably pretty hardcore opinions about why it's not as culturally relevant as it might have been. That do also we can talk about this, but they do also some of my opinions reflect on academia and the idea of how to teach or how to like do what everyone's trying to do, which we can talk about, because I do have some opinions about how you can use this experience to your fullest versus just trying to come in blindly and learn how to have learn how to do independence and find a sound and get an ensemble. Yeah, it's obviously a much more complex statement, and school can only cover so much, of course, as you know. So, my main drum influences were also composers that I loved. Is Paul Motion, who just passed away a year ago, was a great inspiration to me as almost like as a modern artist. And again, I know that sounds very like I'm elevating a modern artist, but I think Paul Motion is the one musician of that's kind of was from almost like the golden age of jazz. It was active in the late 50s. I call it that simply because of its cultural relevance at the time, not because it was any better or any worse or anything. And that was continually pushing whatever was possible in a really iconoclastic way, like a controversial drummer composer until he died, the day he died. So into his 80s, was still like had bands that were strange instrumentation. The drum relationship with everything would be considered very modern thinking. To this day, I don't think there's been as courageous a statement as far as the abandoning of certain, what we would call normal techniques. If you haven't checked out Paul Motion or post Bill Evans' 60s Paul Motion, most importantly, even though you could hear it in the playing back then when he was playing very straight ahead, but where it went from there was a continual abandoning of what we would consider really a lot of normal drum techniques and almost making it into some very, very strong abstract statement, like an art statement, all the while feeling still like it was a part of this generation of jazz, that it was a cultural rhythm at the time, a cultural beat to hear a swing ride cymbal played a certain way. He had that, and also had this totally imaginative and also very, very punk style ethos as a musician and as a composer, using very simple folkloric themes that they could, interval themes that were on paper very simple, but the actual ideas of them were very, very futuristic still. The idea of taking some folkloric style melodies and making them rubato in time, and the relationships between things had a lot of tension in them and all these great things. It was someone that was still doing that, so I recommend checking him out and his music. Mostly my favorite playing of his, if you want to go straight to it, is his playing with the Paul Motion Trio, which is Bill Frisell and Joe Lovano and him. There are many records. It was a very long standing trio from the early 80s until he died, and also his work with the Keith Jarrett American Quartet from the early 70s. There were a bunch of records with this, and that was almost like, for me, in fact, I might have brought that up the last time I talked here, about 5 or 6 years ago I talked here, so maybe this is a whole new set of people, I understand, but I brought up that band, that's Keith Jarrett, Charlie Hayden, Dewey Redman, and Paul Motion, were very much, to me, like a ground zero of those sort of gangster ethos of like they're going to, each one of those people is someone not fitting in, let's say, not willingly just fitting in the scope of what's the most swinging, the most rational, the most, whatever. That moment there, even though it's led by Keith Jarrett, it's really not led by, you can tell Keith's not sitting there going, Dewey, I think you should, or Paul, you should maybe do that or something. there's none of that. You can tell that's to Keith Jarrett's credit, I should say too, that he kind of, as a leader personality himself, sees the importance of working with the same people, developing a sound, and having a kind of an iconoclastic approach. So Paul's playing in that is something to check out. It's very mysterious at times. What is actually going on? In fact, we've used some drum solos from this era. It truly is like the anti-drum solo as what you would think a drum solo is. It's hard to describe if you haven't checked it out. But all the while it feels amazing and the sound is very personal. And of course I can run the whole pantheon of people like Elvin Jones and Tony Williams and all these icons of those eras. Those people, and then the post that era like Billy Hart and Joey Barron and Jack DeJohnette. The common theme would be that all of these people are sort of dramatic personalities on the instrument. The music being played when they're playing it can only happen if they are playing that music. It's not a dominant position, it's just a position of, instantly that person is playing, they've developed this sound, or they have an approach that involves you're not sure if they're going to pull it off, you know what I mean? There's moments of very high drama in all of those players, where I don't know if you've seen any of those musicians before, Joey Barrett or Billy Hart or Jack DeJohnette or Al Foster is another one. Again, a very strange, I remember seeing Al Foster play with Herbie Hancock when I was young, in the Herbie Hancock sort of acoustic trio of like the late 80s with Buster Williams. Do you remember this band? Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing Al Foster play, and in jazz, you're playing straight ahead, whatever, the hi-hat playing on 2 and 4, and whatever. And I just remember almost the whole show he was playing a hi-hat on 1 and 3. And just when you're 17 or whatever, and I'm just like, that is just wow, like just a little move like that is almost like a stance of some sort. Like it still feels so great, and it's this strange. And I'm talking a full-on commitment to do it. At first I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Switching it up during the song, and everyone's done that. Oh, it's next tune. Does he know where? And like the whole show, I'm just like, man, this is so really interesting. You know what I mean? It's just I used to gather little moments like that, and almost stitch together a quilt of like people breaking rules. Like it's okay, I guess that might be okay. And then of course I would do things like that with the wrong people, and then be considered terrible, and like, I mean, it should be known, there are, I'm sure there are, I know there are, because it's been in print before, in major magazines, people that really challenge the idea of what I'm doing, or what Reed and Ethan are doing, or, those types of things, and I think that that's just, honestly, I really enjoy that. I really enjoy seeing someone have to be like, I hate that. He is awful. And I don't mean I enjoy it as some sadistic. I enjoy being put down. Of course, I don't enjoy that, but I do enjoy being a part of the company of the people that I know went through that thing in their own generation. There was a article on the Bad Plus in the early 2000s. This actually, our controversy has kind of waned in a way that makes us want to be like, man, we got to think of something else. But like, as the geo worldview of what we're doing in the jazz world, we've kind of morphed into this, sophisticated thing. We're like, wow, we always thought we were, you know what I mean? But I guess we've morphed into that. Anyway, in the early 2000s, there was this article, probably the most vicious one against us. We were on the cover of Jazz Times, and they had I'm only bringing this up because it scarred me for life. And I did all. This was a very great moment for us. We were on the cover of Jazz Times, and it was a very positive article, and what they did was they did a thing where they wanted someone to weigh in on us that hated us. Essentially, they wanted to use the controversy of the band to sell their magazine or whatever they need to do, and they found the person that just thought we were just destroying, music or something. We were like, truly like treating us almost like we were like some sort of Mussolini personality of like, I mean, how evil, you know what I mean? We're thinking this as, wow, we really got some power if we really upset this person that much, you know? I was taking the sort of Freudian like approach of like hate is the base emotion of love or something. And I was like trying to feel really good about it. Like, wow, this person really digs us. You know? he wants to love us so bad. You know. Anyway, it was so incredibly vicious. Okay, this article. This is probably still online. And this guy actually writes mostly about ironically about fusion and stuff like that. So I don't know why he was just really going after us hard, and he went after me really hard, saying I literally am just worthless, you know, I'm just this like ham-fisted idiot and stuff like that. Anyway, I was like reading this, going, wow, it can't get much worse, you know, at least we know where the bottom is, you know? Like what's the next piece, someone's gonna go, you think they were that bad? You know, they're worse than that. It was one of those where you really realized you had done the thing that has really upset someone, you know. And I'm only saying this because this was a great moment. There of course is a moment where you're feeling hurt, like this is your work, you know, your artwork. And you want to be like, really? You really think that we can't do that just because we don't? You know, that short-sighted thing of like someone makes decisions based on their limitations, not based on their aesthetic choice, which is bad. Plus, really is a group that makes decisions on an aesthetic level at all times, from the artwork of the record to the... It's not based in, well, I can't swing, so I gotta play this. It's so small. You know, that worldview is so tiny. You know, you don't like listen to Captain Beefheart and go, gosh, he just doesn't do any ballads like the crooners. I want to do like a crooning ballad. Like, you know, it's like that. No, that's an art piece. You know what I mean? You have to meet it on its own terms and realize that that's what's being out there. Anyway, so I remember reading this and just going, wow, you know, that's really vicious, and thinking, wow, he really went after me hard there. It's a pretty big magazine, you know. And I was thinking that like, wow, it sinks in, you're like, wow, you didn't think you were doing anything that really upset, like really made someone mad. And I'll never forget this is so nice, and I had brought him up before, but I got an email from the guitarist Bill Frisell about 3 or 4 days later. He was a real early supporter of this group. He came out after our first record saying, you know, you really gotta hear this. This is a new approach to things. You know, it was really, and he was one of our heroes, you know, it was really great to hear him come on. And I subsequently got to know him a little bit from playing at different festivals, and then recently we've begun playing together. Anyway, this is now, but he sent me an email and he said, you know, I saw the Jazz Times piece. You know, I think most people saw it that pay any attention to that stuff, especially when there was such a hype on us to either look at us one way or the other. And he said, you know, now you're in line with all the people that you loved. And it was really like a beautiful thing to not only say to someone where he knew I was really, or we were really trying to take the music someplace personal, you know, and willing to do that. You have to be willing to really, you know, hang your neck out there, you know, stick your neck out there and really like realize that, you know, your work is going to be challenged, and that's okay, you know, but it's also going to be hurtful sometimes. People are going to not want that in all forms of life, you know. You're going to somehow offend people with what your statement is, even though your statement is based in love or joy or any of these higher vibrating frequencies of creation or whatever. It's still somehow going to be a bad thing for someone. And he said that to me, and said, now you're in line with your heroes, you know, Orrin Echolm and John Coltrane, all these people. He said, you should read their reviews. And then he said, you know, when in 25 years when you're making your music, where's this person going to be? You know, and it's really true. It's like, and Bill was another kind of iconoclastic thinking musician who was not, you know, adored by all critics, and still isn't, you know, for his choices. And ironically, Bill Carruthers sent me an email when that came out too, because I had been playing a lot with Bill, and Bill said, just one line, Bill's so very direct personality, I'm sure you all know. He said, I'll never forget this. In fact, I thanked him for this recently, because I was remembering this, we were doing this talk about like when you're criticized, and we always bring this article up, because this article was really as hardcore as you can be criticized, really. literally saying, "Stop playing, you're awful." Literally, it was like, "I hate you." It was really hateful. And Bill wrote, "It's the tallest weed that always gets cut." And it was really, he just said, it was really a beautiful, like, wow, you know, like, you know, I went, "What am I, a weed?" No, no. I mean, it was a beautiful, like, you know, you stand up and you're doing these things and they're going to come after you, you know, it's a beautiful statement, you know. And so, long story is that the list of people for me is very long that have inspired me, but mostly it's people from any art movement that have a highly tuned aesthetic, not based on limitations, but they want to use, you know, they want to make a statement, a declarative statement, you know, that to me is based in some, less about ego, less about I need to be, you know, make my mark, and more about the community at large, you know. It's a statement that we can all evolve into musicians that have a personal voice, and that more and more of that is needed. You know, if it becomes the norm, it's more supported and acceptable for people to take it way further than it's gone so far. And that's what I mean about today. There's a lot more to be done in creative music, and you know, I might have some opinions about how ingenuity, you know, where is the ingenuity? Is it really in like subdividing a note to where you can't even tell what universe you're in, time signature wise? Is that in, you know, I don't know. But I mean, we use some of those meta contemporary classical techniques in improvised music right now, but for us it's always about how good it feels and does it really have a statement, does it make a statement? I'm not sure if that's going on today as high a place as it should, but I think that improvised music today, creative music, there's some people that are, and I'm sure you're fans of them or whatever, that are, there's a peer group for us that's really attempting to push those things, you know, and to weigh in from this generation's perspective. So it's up to everyone from your generation to we often talk about, wow, what is the improvised musician that is sort of iconoclastic gonna say when they're in this generation of people with what you've been, you know, there really is a gap. I'm much more, you know, we're in a different, you know, we're really technically still in the LP generation. When I was learning how to play the music, I had to like go to the library. There wasn't like things that were available to us right away. You had to kind of create your own interest in it, especially if you were from a smaller town or whatever. So the musician today, with the amount that you're taking in, the improvising musician, I'm always really like, I'm part terrified and part really like waiting to hear that musician that's like a strange musician in the future. You know what I mean? Like, well, that's future music. And that's you know, there are some people out there trying that go for that. You know, it's going to be interesting to see if there's those people appearing now that are like truly like web-handed, like future brains that are just like, you know, think about it. I mean, because there's already a speed level of getting things together that's like really terrifying. And just as my drum generation is focused a lot in some of these types of independence techniques or subdividing the beat techniques, I could go on and on about how maybe the focus should be a little bit more on feel as well, or some sort of earthy approach to rhythm, you know, have your feet planted on the ground, you know, when you're coming up with these ideas, but it's still a very exciting time, I think, for improvised music. That was a very long, but you know what I mean? So you can take that and run with it as far as where you find inspiration. I'm sure it's all the same people that we're talking about. You know?
It's really great for me. I've listened to Band Plus Prog, was the first album that I listened to in middle school, and it blew my mind. It was so cool. So to be able to sit here and just like pick your brain and learn about you, not just about like the style of music, but learn about you and the rebelliousness. Like that is so cool to me. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And one more question. Do you have any advice for percussionists, for composers getting out there, getting into the market, getting known, just anything?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest advice is to, I I feel like along those lines with how available everything is, that goes to also how available recording your music and putting it out is. And I think my biggest piece of advice is to be very careful about what you're recording and putting out right now. I think that it's really important to be in control of the new avenues and toys and new things, because there was a natural selection that occurred before all of this, that like every show you're playing for tips at a sub sandwich bar is not all of a sudden available for everyone to look at and listen to you while you're developing. In a slower generation, those types of things helped in many ways us being able to kind of not record some of our earlier ideas and put them out for sale. And I'm not saying you guys are doing that, but I do know that it's a part of even, you know, just being able to make your own CD from the 90s on is one of the, I know many musicians that put out records that they're really in pain listening to. And I'm talking about on the highest level, people you might know, I won't name names, but us included on some level, you know. Not the Bad Plus, but us as doing other things. And I would think, number one, right now, using this experience where you're all together and you can trade ideas, that's what music school is at its best, number one. Or to be honest with you, I would say this if Dane wasn't here, and but he's sort of a guy that everybody knows from this area, almost like, I call you kind of the mid, I hope this is okay, but I've referenced you as sort of this Midwest Bob Moses type figure, but a lot nicer. You know what I mean? Where you're the sage of the Midwest kind of guy. If you have that, or like a Bill Carruthers, you have that ability to have someone that has done a lot, seen a lot, and has a mastery of things, picking that brain and picking each other's and playing together as much as possible. As far as advice beyond that, wherever you take it, I know that jazz and improvised music is becoming more and more regional, which I think is a very good thing, that regional scenes are developing. That even though New York would be considered a dominant place culturally in America, as far as, especially for improvised music, the reality of New York, which our group is based in New York, I do not live there. I lived there in the late 80s, early 90s, and then I moved to Los Angeles, where I lived for many years. Then I moved to Minneapolis when I had when my wife and I started having children. I didn't want to raise them in both places, but I did play a lot in New York all the time. So I was I'm still, I think most people think I live there, actually, that live there. So when they find, you know, even people that have known me for years, I still went, why don't you ever ask me to come over, you know? Because I live in Golden Valley, Minnesota. but like, New York is an option for getting in an environment where you're meeting creative musicians, but not so much an environment to actually play gigs and to make music that matters any more than it would anywhere else. I truly believe that at this point, if you have venues and you have willing talents to develop scenes in smaller cities, and of course in cities like Chicago and Minneapolis, where they're famous music scenes to begin with, like Seattle. Minneapolis, of course, is a very known music scene with many venues and whatever, and also some heavy musicians living there, but also, you know, places like Los Angeles or San Francisco. These are the ones that come to mind right away, instead of things like, I'm sorry if you're from these areas, but like Indianapolis or Cincinnati or, you know, places like that. I haven't seen too many really relevant banding together of music scenes. That doesn't mean it's not happening, I just haven't seen it from touring for 15 years or whatever. But in these other cities, you meet musicians in Seattle or Minneapolis or Chicago or whatever, where they're really proud of developing their own regional art sounds, you know, which I think is really important. And in fact, you can hear that in many early jazz or whatever. You know, you have these Detroit type, you know, people that are coming out of Detroit have a certain thing, and people that come out of, especially Detroit, which we're quite proud of, or St. Louis or something like that. That's actually was a really important thing that I think has been lost by filtering everyone either through the New York jazz scene, or then you go to LA to play session work, or you go to Nashville to become a country session musician or whatever. I think if those lines are blurred even more, I think more interesting regional sounds can occur. So I wouldn't say, like maybe 20 years ago I would have sat here and said, well, you got to move to New York, which is what a lot of people say, you know, if you're going to play jazz anyway. I really don't think so anymore. I really feel like, you know, I don't want to say anything, but I'm not sure that Appleton is the necessarily the town to you know, like dominate the jazz world from, although that would be amazing and interesting. You heard this band from Appleton is unbelievable. And they won't leave, you know. You know, but I mean, you know, a perfect example of a regional and like legendary band would be the Fringe from Boston, which has a very important relevance to the music of Boston, but also the music students of Berkeley and all these other places. The Fringe still is this very, you know, these are guys that you don't really see hired by much anyone else. They've sort of had make their statement. They've been playing every Monday for like 35 years or something. I've gotten the chance, you know, to, you know, I'd seen them over the years when I was much younger, but Happy Apple was touring a few years ago, and we ended up doing a double bill with them. We have a similar ethos with those guys in a way. We're sort of outsider art in many ways, but we're also like nationally or internationally known band. So when Happy Apple plays in New York, it's like very there's press for it, and there's the New York musicians all considered a part of this thing. But we're not from there. We're this other sound. So it's sort of like you can hear that regional. Like, it's mysterious on some level. We used that as a weapon, you know. That's one of the reasons why I stayed in Minneapolis, for instance, is after I, you know, moved back there but didn't feel I had to leave, was that when I met Mike and Eric, the guys in Happy Apple, I realized they were world-like, and I hate to say world-class, but I mean, you know what I mean, like musicians that were not only iconoclastic thinking, but also on a level of limitless, like, technical, emotional, you know, all these other very important tools to making good music. Those guys have it on the highest level. They're both considered like some of the greatest musicians on the planet by any means. I remember this last summer touring the whole summer with Joshua Redman, one of the greatest saxophonists in the world, and he would not. He was like, Mike Lewis is one of the greatest, you know, tenor players in the world. And I'm like, yeah, well, to hear him play alto is really where it's like, he's like, really, I need to, but it's a known thing, and he's never lived in New York, he's never, you know what I mean? So it's possible. It's rare. It is rare, but it's possible, you know. Anyway, the Fringe, I went out and played. I have to tell you this story because that's a very iconoclastic thinking thing. I know maybe everyone's getting, this is a long answer, but it's an important one. We did this show with them, and at their Lily Pad, this club that they're famous for playing now on every Monday night or whatever. And we're so excited. We're like, man, we're going to play with the Fringe, you know. I mean, they're legends of this thing. And even though they're legends, you know, maybe 15 people come to see them. To be totally honest with you, for our show, it was totally packed, and then 2/3 the audience left. For the Fringe, it's such a normal thing that maybe people have taken advantage of, or maybe there were some people that, for some reason, didn't know that the Fringe is so this other thing, but they started playing. We were very excited. I was like, I haven't seen these guys since my late teens when I actually lived. I was bouncing around New York and Boston in my late teens, just kind of figuring out if I should do. I didn't go to music school out there or anything, but if I was going to see about those scenes, so I was trying them out. I saw them many times, and there's just torrential, like real free jazz, like a torrent of information and angst coming at you, like from like the guys that have been around doing it for a long time, and just sort of like you're just sort of like, wow, this transcends aggressive energy. It's really truly like they're going for it, you know, from note one. Every concert's totally improvised. And near the end of the show, you know, you see that there's like 9 people left. You know, we're all just sitting there still like this. This is just like 4 years ago. And all of a sudden, the lights in the club, the electricity went out, the power went out, and it was pitch black. Now, they weren't using amps anyway, so there were no lights at all. There was no light from an amp for the bass, is what I mean. It's a saxophone, bass, and drum trio, if you don't know. And so it was pitch black in the room, and you really couldn't see, because it was one of these like little spaces. You really couldn't see anything. And I just realized we were in this like free jazz nightmare. There's just like no one stopping. It's like, George Garzon, you know, is just like, it's just wailing away at you, and it really became this thing like, this is maybe number one how this music should always be presented. This thing of like, man, this is really inspiring in a way, because we're just on the planet, like, where is this happening right now? There's like 10 people, it's totally black, pitch black, you can't see, and this torrent of noise is coming at you at the highest level of like, really truly like, George Garzon is just like really like the heaviest, like torrential free jazz saxophonist I think today, just like saying basically like, it's not gonna stop, you know? Just sheets of notes hitting you, you know? And it's going on for 5 minutes, it becomes a very transcendental, strange experience of like, this is amazing. I remember Mike Lewis just grabbing my leg, like, what are we watching? and so they stop, they end their piece, and since you can't see them, no one is clapping. There's complete silence in the room. And they're just standing. You can sort of see the shadow of these three people. They're like this far away, like to me, to you, right? And I'm sitting here like this. And just, George Garzon just standing there, and you just see this big kind of figure just sitting there. And it's just total silence for like 3 or 4 minutes. And no one knows what to do. It's this moment where I'm like, this is, I was like, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. I'm like, this is unbelievable. And I'm just saying, like, who's gonna do something? I mean, should I just start I mean, you're so put in a position to do all those norms of, we gotta clap now, someone's gotta make a sound. 3 or 4 minutes into this, we're just sitting there, and no one knows what to do. No one can see if they're gonna start again, so no one wants to be the guy that starts clapping, and then they start wailing, like, whatever. And all of a sudden, George Garzon starts screaming at the top of 30 seconds, just screaming. And then the lights came on. That was the end of the show. And I was like, this is the most... The whole time I'm thinking, like, this is where the future is. Designing the experience to be that, you know, to like this, you know, like people need to pay. So my long story is, pay very close attention to making sure you're worth checking out. You're worth listening to. It's not just enough to play through your tunes and to be looking at your music and, you know, like, just because you can play this certain thing that you should expect people to check it out or be moved by it. I think especially the odds are against us when you're doing creative music or music that's not commercially based, not a part of some fashionable scene, something that's cool, you know, something that's whatever. You're trying to maybe do something that exists between those worlds or outside those worlds. And it can be done, but you have to pay attention to the aesthetic on the highest level and nuances. And that's what I mean about that. Even though that was an accident, it became a super powerful thing. And I think the Bad Plus, Happy Apple, these groups that I've worked with, I've opted to work mainly much more in bands. I've turned down lots of side band work in my life, including recently higher profile things that I just feel like I want to be able to be in a position to be comfortable stating what I need to state, right? So what I'm saying is, if you're going to have your groups, your music, your composers, your whatever, detail it down to what you're doing, down to know your music when you show up, and don't just sit there looking at each other like, should we sort of in shuffling through your music. I really think that that's hurt the music over the years. You know, when you saw the Miles Quintet, they weren't like shuffling through music and like everyone's sort of like vibeless, and like it was like incredible vibe. You know, it was like the reason why it was cool is because it was so vibe heavy and people looked good, and it was like, you know what I mean? Coltrane wasn't going, here's my next tune, it's, you know, but he was just a guy back then, you know what I mean? He wasn't like a guy towering over the world, like if you walked in today, we'd all be like, you know, like flowers would be blooming. We'd all just be on the ground looking at him. He's a guy that was criticized and like, you know what I mean? And was like, people thought he played too much and too loud and too whatever, you know? So remember that there isn't some rarefied space that these other people existed in. I mean, of course, it's a rare, I mean, we can say, I'm just using again some easy statements. Of course, we can say that Coltrane and Miles Davis were in a rarefied space on the planet, yes. But it doesn't mean there isn't room for that, okay? And so, take care of your aesthetic. The Bad Plus, from the beginning, took care of the artwork we put out there on our records, took care of our photographs, took care of our aesthetic in a way where we were coming at it from an outsider perspective. We knew we never wanted to have music on stage, no matter how complex the piece, we needed to know it. Happy Apple's the same way. Just detailing your statement, you know, is very important. That's how you can actually rise above just having your individual virtuosity, and you've got your tunes, and you're going to play the Tea Lounge in Brooklyn, and there it is, right? So, you know, that's a big one. And I bring up the Fringe because that was a moment where I thought that's another aesthetic to think about on some levels, how you can present this music in a way that's so compelling, from the space you're doing it in, to the light, to everything. There's a way to think about this stuff that goes beyond, well, I have this tone on my horn and I have these tunes. Don't you want to hear me? Why don't I have a career? You know, more often than not, some of this individual virtuosic musicianship has led to being told you're a leader, being told you're a composer, being told given a deal with whatever, and the tunes are like whatever, and this, you know, it's just like not very compelling energy on stage, but it's just an amazing display of technique. This is a problem, you know, ultimately in jazz, I think, and why it's maybe lost some of its deep cultural relevances. You know, it's moved from the neighborhood and moved from music that you can sing to each other, and you can, you know, you have an aesthetic. I mean, I think we all can agree, if you're familiar with the Ornette Coleman Quartet, when they showed up in New York, very criticized Don Cherry, but they had an aesthetic that was outsider art all the way. Don Cherry wearing like red plastic cowboy hats, and Ornette playing a plastic saxophone. These were decisions made to make statements beyond the music. You know, really, truly, it was a multiracial band, all these other things that were like, they knew what they were doing on some level. It was, Monk had a very calculated presence a lot of the time. It wasn't just a weird guy that spun in circles. I mean, he was fashionable. He wore glasses with no lenses all the time, where people would be like, why are you wearing glasses without lenses? You know, and this was like the late 50s. Like, what is he doing, you know? There's ways to make your thing more, you know, enjoyable and powerful. Is that cool?
Yeah, thank you.
Was there a point in your life where you not stopped, but kind of focused on creating your own voice rather than imitating the voice of other drummers or composers?
That's a great question, and there was a time when I was. In fact, I recently listened to a recording of myself. This goes against the thing I said before, and I'll make this quick. I know I'm taking a lot of time on these questions, but I mean, you know, if are you all coming to the show tonight, maybe? Yeah. So you can hear what I play tonight, and it's going to be better in that context anyway. I'm not much of a guy that sits in a room and solos for people. I really am not good at that. I've done drum clinics where I've literally seen people go, what's the big deal with this guy? You know, I'm talking about like scraping a cymbal, and everyone's just there to see someone really mac out, and they're just like, this guy's terrible. I've actually seen that before. But anyway, in my early 20s, one of my first recordings I made was with Reed, actually. Reed and I had been playing together, the bassist of the Bad Plus, for a long time. And I was living in Los Angeles. I was about 21. And I was playing with different things. There was this great guitar player out there, a guy named Dave Askren, who played with he's a sideman to a lot of people, and whatever. And I brought Reed out. Reed was living in Philadelphia. He was studying at the Curtis Institute. So he was Reed's was a high-level classical musician student. He graduated from Curtis, and he's never played a note of the music sense. He didn't want to. His choice was to not go down the road of getting into an orchestra and doing that road. But he was that's of course considered the #1 conservatory, not only in America but possibly in the world. It's really truly a great place for classical musicians. Anyway, he was there, and I brought him out to Los Angeles, and we worked up all this original music and some things you might consider the beginning of the Bad Pluses ethos. We took some rock music. This is the early 90s. We took some rock music from a couple different eras. We took a couple of movie themes, like a tune from the Willy Wonka film and other stuff, and we were reworking it in ways not necessarily like jazz harmony versions. It was much more complex emotion than that. It became one of the ideas we kept when we formed Bad Plus. This is 10 years before that, though. And I heard this recording recently, and the thing that I thought about it that was so interesting is, number one, I thought it was really good. I thought it was like, this is a recording that we should put out now, because it actually shows like we were trying to do something. But in a way I liked it so much because I sort of sounded more like my hero, like I sound very much like Paul Motion on this, and even in my tone, meets sort of a Jack DeJohnette, meets sort of me trying to push whatever envelope I can push. But the thing is the playing, it reminded me just more of what I like to hear when I'm here. Like, it reminded me that I was sort of still emulating a lot of people that I really loved, and since they were so great, I kind of liked listening to what I was you know what I mean? It was like one of those things where I was like, wow, because there was a period after that where I kind of demolished it. And for me, demolishing it meant really taking things too far, really going out of my comfort zones, really being dense, loud, anything I could to try to find some new touch. You know, that's what was so important. So from about 22 to 26, 27 was my period. In fact, even later, even into my late 20s, I was still, and I'm still refining, of course. That's one of the things I should say is, you've got to always be doing that. And I think that's another fault of a lot of people that are given accolades early on, is that they just do that thing the rest of their lives. It's good to be criticized your whole career in many ways. It makes you really rethink. But anyway, this period that I had in my 20s where I was smashing anything that I could to try to find something new, the recordings from that period I don't like very much. And some of the brazen attitude I like, and I do like the spirit behind it, but some of the aesthetic decisions are things I would never do today. You know what I mean? It was like it took that kind of energy to really want to be your own musician, and that can take brutal introspection. Like, it can take it really can, not to be melodramatic, but it can, if you really want to come out the other side with something that you might consider unique, it can take, you know, that rough, like, going at it and abandoning things you might consider are good or rational or whatever, just to find something new. I did go through that. And so, actually, this recording might come out, me and Reed and this guitarist, and man, I was listening to it just going, number one, you think, gosh, maybe we were pretty good back when we were 20. I mean, I'm just saying this as a, you know, like, we were relieved because you're hearing it going, God, help me, I hope I wasn't as terrible as I... But it was like, Reed and I were both, and we're very self-critical, like, wow, you know, but we also knew we were really kind of like, it was an homage to our heroes, not only compositionally, but our approaches. You know, anyway, so that's another long answer, but yeah, that's, I say that I think it's important to reach a point where you don't have to do it violently either, like, well, you know, I hate Paul Motion, I'm turning my back on that, and I'm doing whatever, of course, because sometimes people do that, you know, they really turn their back on people that they inspire them. It's just more like, you know, you need to find your own space, especially if you sound as much like someone as I did back then. I mean, it's fun, it's like, there was a 2-year period where I sound, from the brush style playing, which is kind of clunky, and it was like the sound of the bass drum, I was tuning it to the, you know, I really went down there, you know, and went into it.
I was going to ask what your thoughts on the term creative music are, because you always use that, and sometimes it seems like almost as a substitute for music that people might call jazz, or...
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it is true that I try to use that term because I don't want to personally enter into the argument about what jazz is, because I want to honor people's experience that were part of an era where jazz was very culturally relevant. So number one, I don't want to be as arrogant to sit there and say that if that word meant so much to some people from an era that they're willing to, like, kill you if you call yourself jazz. You know, I don't want to, I don't care enough to fight for that word. You know what I mean? I care about the music that's relevant from the life experience of everything today. And to me, that's what jazz represents, is music of its era, you know, and exploratory music of its era and improvised music of its era, you know. And I'm not going to pretend I'm from another era, and I shouldn't have to, and neither should you. So it doesn't mean to ignore anything, because if anyone knows anything about music at all, you are going to hear the blues in this music tonight, you're going to hear swing feel, you're going to hear, it's just, sometimes it isn't just like, we don't have to be so obvious with our work, you know what I mean? But it's like saying that some of the great abstract expressionists, you can't see formalism in their technique, but you absolutely can if you're a painter. You can see brushstroke that is very learned, very of a period of academic. You know what I mean? And I don't mean it has to be qualified like that, but I just mean if you look deeply into most work, you can see that it's in capable hands from people that are coming from all sides of the coin. So I use creative music. I do say jazz or creative music, but I always say or creative music, however you want to think about it. Just music made, number one, music that has improvising in it. Number two, because creative music ensembles, contemporary classical music, that I consider that part of that pantheon as well. But since my discipline is more in improvised music, I just tend to let that option be there for people to say or whatever, because I don't want anyone to go, well, that's not, you know, jazz is blah blah blah. And I just say, fine, jazz is blah blah blah. I don't want to fight for it. You know. Ironically, one of the heaviest people that's terrifying to most people about what jazz is, what isn't, is the music critic Stanley Crouch, who you might know about this quite militant views of jazz on paper. You know, as someone that's been fired from publications or whatever, and gone on many personal tirades and attacks on people from all generations of what jazz is and what isn't. Okay, I grew up reading Stanley's liner notes and Wynton Marsalis's records and being quite terrified of him, you know what I mean? Like, wow, I really hope that Stanley doesn't weigh in. I'm telling you this because this is a very funny story. So we were playing the Village Vanguard. We've been playing the Vanguard for about 12 years, at least a week a year, sometimes two. And we were in the back. Reed was, this particular week though, Reed was playing the Vanguard with Paul Motion, believe it or not. Reed played 1 week with Paul Motion, subbing for someone in Paul's band. It was really amazing. And Reed was, so Stanley came down. And Stanley liked Paul, I think, and liked, you know, I guess Paul was okay in Stanley's eyes, which I thought was ironic to begin with, because Paul isn't okay in a lot of people like that's eyes. But Stanley was down there, and Reed was talking to Stanley, and Stanley liked Reed. He was like, always said, Reed, you really sound, you know, you're really swinging. You really got this thing, you know, and you can really do, if you want to, you should put together whatever. And Reed, you know, never said anything about whatever. And then Stanley was sitting back there, and he picked up a magazine and had a big picture of us in it. And Stanley didn't realize that Reed was the same guy in the photo of the Bad Plus. This is really true. And right in front of Reed, he's like, sad motherfuckers, man. No, this gets so good. This shows, but this is to his credit too. You have to hear this whole thing. And Reed is just like, wow, this is an amazing moment. You get to experience one of the world's really heavy and really intelligent culture critics. He's won the Genius Grant. Really, truly a heavyweight. He knows what he's talking about a lot of the time. I really would agree with some of his opinions a lot of the time. You know, I don't agree with a lot of the way he goes about levying his opinions and hurting people's feelings, and also the way he would attack someone like Ornette Coleman or people like that. But I do think he's very intelligent and knows music, and thus creating the fear. If he wasn't someone I sort of respected, I would have been like, well, fuck this guy, and just play like Adam. But it was just like, okay, so Reed is sitting there, and then Stanley like starts talking to Reed again about like, man, so what are you gonna do? What do you do? What's your band again? And Reed's like, well, this is beautiful. You know, I've got to do it. He goes, well, Stanley, my band's the Bad Plus. I'm the bass player of the Bad Plus. And Stanley was like, he literally was like, wait. You know, he clearly had never heard us, never heard a note. He just decided that it was this thing, and he already admitted that he liked Reed. You know, he'd seen Reed play a few times and other things. And he literally said, "You're the bass player of the Bad Plus?" He goes, "Yeah, well, that's my band. I co-founded that band with Dave. You know, that's my band, you know." And that's what I do. That's my statement, really. And Stan's like, "Wow." And he goes, "I guess I gotta come check that shit out." You know, he's literally like, "Fine, I guess I got to, you know." And he's like, "You should come down, you know, you might not like it, but you know, you should come down." So about 4 months later, we were playing the Vanguard. And I kind of remembered Reed telling me about this, you know, that he ran in Stanley Crouch this story, and it was amazing, you know, that he did this. And I'm sitting there, and if you play the Vanguard, if you've ever been there, there's an area right by the drums that you can sit. It's kind of off the grid, you know, like there's not a table in front of it. I'll make this quick, but this is incredible. But every now and again, if you play the Vanguard, you know, you're really this close to someone. And it's New York, it's the place to play, it's like the thing, and you can't help but feel some of the pressure involved every time you do it. You know, it's like, you just want to be at your best at the lore of the place, and you never know who's there. Many times I have turned and seen people like Jeff Watts sitting right behind me. Billy Hart was just sitting behind me 3 weeks ago when we played, sat behind me the whole night. You can feel that. You know, like, no matter how confident you are, you're like, "Can this just be my best playing? You know, please." So anyway, you're used to the every now and again the person that enters that zone, and a lot of times it will be a rarefied person because they don't usually let anyone sit there. The tables kind of start. The one table starts there, so you have a little bit of comfort zone. So you know whoever is sitting there is privileged enough where the Vanguard says go sit there. And they also usually come in a song or two into the set, which no one ever does at the Vanguard, is very strict about. So this would be any time you see a figure peripherally come sauntering in between songs and sit next to you, you're wondering who it is, okay? And it's low light, so you can't usually tell unless you look straight at the person. Who are you, you know? So we're playing, we're midway through the week, and I'm just doing my thing, like slogging through the Vanguard, and I sit down, you know, and second song into the night, and here comes, you know, it doesn't happen every night. This is once every, you know, maybe you can go a week without it happening, okay? In fact, Paul Motion did it once to me before one of the first times we played it. That was the most horrifying experience for me, very nerve-wracking. But anyway, I'm sitting there like, you know, playing, and I see the peripheral figure, quite a large figure, Sandra, like really the presence is known, you know, and just sitting down behind me, I'm like, gosh, who is this, and who is this, you know, and we play it soon, and I just sort of, I'm trying so hard to not look obviously like I've got to find out who it is, and I just peripherally enough realize that it's Stanley Crouch, and he's sitting this close to me, and he's the most critical, frankly, you know, of a lot of young jazz musicians of any discipline, the younger generation of whatever, and truly of any color, anything. He'll literally go after you for every aspect of your playing that he doesn't consider is a part of the tradition of the blues, of whatever. So it's not swinging, you're dead. I mean, he will literally get in fights with people at venues. Okay, so I'm like, oh, you know, and the whole time I'm going, don't, let's not play blues, you know. I was like, okay, so fine. I just said, you know, screw it. This is what it is, you know. This is what you're going to go through your whole career. It doesn't matter if you're on the covers of magazines or you're doing whatever. You're going to have those moments where you're going to feel very vulnerable as an improvising musician. You're just going to have to let go of it and be pure and try to play what you do and make your statement. The second song, I hear him back there going, you know, like, and we're playing this kind of blues swing type thing, and he's vocalizing, like, I'm wondering if he's vocalizing pain, whatever. We finish the show, finish the set, and I immediately just leave. I go in the back room, and I'm like, and Ethan comes back, he's like, yeah, Stanley's back there. I'm like, yeah, you know, Ethan had gotten to know him a little bit as well, but he was quite critical, actually, of Ethan, too, when he saw Ethan once with something else. And so here it was, he was checking out the Bad Plus the first time, and this was a guy that's much more militant than the couple of the critics that really bashed us. So this could be like really brutal. And I came out after a while, and there he was sitting in the bar, and Ethan was talking to him, and I walked by, and he said, Dave, waved me over, and I'm like, Stanley, man, it's an honor to meet you. I've been, reading your liner notes and been a fan of your cultural criticism. I said, I really agree with some of the things you say. I made it a point, like Ethan will argue with him too. And that's another story of the arguments now that I've had with him. But Stanley, I count as one of my friends now because of this moment. And he looked at me and he's like, man, I gotta be honest with you. I really thought you would suck. I really do. I really came in here wanting to really dislike you. And I'm like, wow. I remember thinking to myself, that's an odd way to be as a human being. Like, I want to dislike you. And I remember thinking, oh, okay. And I'm not saying this to boast or anything, but it was a real moment of like, your expectation of a moment is to be hated, or you're saying. And he said to me, I think you're one of the great drummers of your generation already. And he was like, you play with the feel of something old, but you play all this new stuff, you have enthusiasm. He started breaking it all down and saying you have an obligation. He's doing you've got an obligation to play, the music in this way because of the way you can play this. And I remember thinking to myself that I was fully prepared for him to maybe punch me or something. And have him say that to me, it was really a moment of like, was he messing with me, or what's he doing? And he was just sitting there doing this kind of hard guy, looking at me and just saying. And then I thought, is he really being real? And I didn't want to lay it on any thicker to stay around. I said, well, thank you, and I appreciate you listening to our music. And I took off before he could change his mind or say, but you have so much to learn, And then he ended up coming back 3 times that week. And I'm thinking, he really does like it. At that point, I was like, that's interesting that he's hearing that whatever. And he would then talk to me more about like the way that the music has to be played with enthusiasm and joy and all these things, and that there's, and there's too much focus on so much complexity in rhythm, and not knowing if your ride cymbal beat is really beautiful and personal. And we talked all about that because he's actually a drummer too. He was a drummer on some records in the early '70s and stuff. And then I realized also you could argue with him about things. Like, he was a critical thinking person. You know what I mean? Like I said, I really disagree with your stuff on Ornette Coleman I've read, and he'd listen to what you'd say, and okay, well, okay. It was really kind of like sweet personality underneath that sort of attack. Like I had shown him I respected him, and he was showing that back. And it was actually a moment of like me really believing again that if you stay to your ideals and you really hone your aesthetic as best you can. I'm not saying, of course, that I am that or that wherever. I probably truly, this isn't like false humility, probably really lucked out, and we played a set of music that we were there and it was like a good week for him. He was feeling maybe good about something. Maybe he was having a good time, or like some other level. I don't know. He was drunk. I don't know. But like but there was a thing that we were doing, and then he subsequently has come to see us a few times since over the years. And actually, he's someone that I could call on his phone right now, and he would sit and talk to me for hours. That's all he wants to do is talk about jazz. So I recommend, if you do get cornered by him, make sure you don't have anywhere to go. I have to hang up the phone the few times that I've talked to him on the phone. But anyway, that honoring of sort of the iconoclastic thinking, along with actually paying attention to all aspects of the music, wherever it's coming from the world music, I'll just put it in that category for right now. It's much more complex than that, but that you're picking up from Dane's expertise to whatever. These are all tools that you can funnel and use in your own experience, and they can create new musics that can make people that want to hear a certain thing change their mind. That was an important lesson for me. I just figured everyone who hated it, and everyone who loved it, but it's more complex than that.
This might not be the best context, but would you play solo piano something or another?
Oh man. You know what? I really appreciate you asking me. I made a record that I'll bring tonight that's piano and drums. I don't know if any of you heard it, but it was a statement enough of me being like terrified to do that. I shedded that music for like a year doing that. I wish I felt more confident to play something really compelling for you right now on the piano. I'm going to say no, but maybe if you want to, I'll play you something after the show tonight or something, or whatever, if you want to come up. You know what I mean? I really use the piano as a compositional tool for the most part. So I'm not a great improviser on piano. I've always played as a composer. That's why that record is they're through composed pieces that I actually shedded for like a year. So in fact, half those pieces I can't play very well anymore. And some of them, I've been playing that record live with the pianist Matt Mitchell. You know, he's in plays with Tim Byrne, and he learned that music, including some of the parts that there's two pianos on some of the tunes I overdubbed. He plays them all on one thing. It's incredible. So I've often thought I shouldn't even play it after seeing someone like a masterful guy do it. But anyway, it's a record if you want to check it out called Indelicate. I don't know if you have it or anything like that, but some of that music's on there. But thank you for asking me is what I'm saying. I appreciate it. But no.
You can shed for a while.
Yeah, I will.
I guess I have one question.
Is there a time limit if people need to get going? It's like 10.
No, they leave when they have to.
Yeah, okay.
But you,
Yeah, do you want to?
call it when you want.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to shoot one more question, or if there's any, if there's, is it absolute, like you have one more question?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, you've been talking about like creating your own sound and kind of like pushing the limits as far as that goes. But to what extent do you have to legitimatize your aesthetics, like the new sound that you're going for?
Yeah.
Like, could you just be like crazy and just go wild with it, or to what extent do you have to back it up with?
Well, that's a very complex issue because, I mean, aesthetic is, you know,
Right.
I mean, number one, it helps with the company that you keep is also, you know, tuned to some frequency together. So you're not just being this egoist-y kind of like going crazy and doing whatever. Again, you know, you could look at a Jackson Pollock painting and say he was just going crazy, but it was really something else,
Mhm.
and it still was this sort of like he was going crazy. You know what I mean? There's a lot of the power of intent in modern art. You know, so what you intend to do and you're in control of is a very powerful thing.
Okay.
So, you know, the great abstract artists of the early 20th century that were changing the way that everything is at the time through painting. I mean, really, truly, like going, like, yeah, but what if we refine it to, you know, a black square, you know? And 20 years earlier, academic painting lorded over the world, and of course, before film and everything, this was what people saw as the statement, the visual statement on the planet, and then you have guys like in Russia going, black squares, you know. And then they're standing there like, you know. So that's a ballsy statement. So you could say that at that moment, that's also a form of going crazy and,
Okay.
and whatever. I mean, to me, it's so, you know, it's a matter of taste, it's a matter of whatever, but it's also where you place it exactly. You know, you can have a very aggressive tone and could be in the wrong company and it's awful. You can have a minimalist concept and everyone around you is, you know, playing this really flourishy music with deep feel, and you've got this kind of Kraftwerk sound, or, you know, like whatever. It could not work or it could be amazing. You know, it depends on how you want to put your ideas and how you can layer them.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would say that it's never, for me, it's never been about just going crazy. That's, for me, that period for me was more searching through exploration that would go beyond what I would consider to be the statement I want to make all the time. It was much more like pushing envelopes, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I still want to do that, but I feel like at this point, when I sit down, I know what I can push and what I can. It's almost like, I've read that about something like about genius or whatever. When you push too far, then you pull back just enough to where
Mhm.
you know actually how to use it. And not only can you go further than the norm, but then you know how to control those spaces.
Right.
And in that, you've got to pull back in a certain way.
Mhm.
So
Cool.
it's a search, though. I mean,
Yeah.
it's worth it, though.
Yeah.
You know. Be fired is what I'm saying. Be fired. Be fired. Don't be afraid of that, because we're tuned to the thing of you've got to be the one. You show up and I'm gonna nail it, you know. And that's, I don't know if that's great artwork, nailing it. You know what I mean? Did the great filmmakers, the great painters, the great sculptors, did they nail it all the time? You know.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was talking to Bill the other day in my lesson, and we were talking about like you guys and then like Robert Glasper and stuff like that, people that have become really successful and like, I mean, like for instance, like Black Radio became like probably the most popular album, jazz album of 2012, but I mean, it's also like jazz album, you know, it's not really like a jazz album. Do you think, I mean, I get that, the context of like it not being culturally relevant anymore, but do you think there'll ever be a point where like we can bring jazz back into cultural like traditional jazz or something like that, some kind of bop, or you know, there's ways to do that where it isn't just like virtuosity. It's actually,
Well, I mean, it is of course relevant on some in circles, right? As far as what you're saying, taking where it was its most cultural, like taking like a neo-bop movement, I don't think so, because that fit in that time. Returning to that time and ignoring what's out there is dangerous. So I think that the relevance can come with the stuff I talked about controlling your aesthetic all the way and doing it wisely, doing it with almost the lens of someone that's not trying to not fit in and do whatever. Like for instance, Robert Glasper is showing the love that he has for R&B, showing for the love that he has for hip hop, all these other things within the context of what he's trying to do. He's not ignoring that music. And it's making an impact, you know. But as far as it as far as it being able to dominate the pop music world or whatever, I'm not sure that's necessary, but I think it can reach much more people. A real quick example is when you hear the word something, you won't like this because it's whatever, and I think that's dangerous. Like, there are so many people that find that they like creative music or jazz or music based in complex themes much more than is given credit for in the common marketplace via TV, films, whatever. You know, if you're into like complex, dense electronic music, why would you be so adverse to like complex, dense, you know, atonal, like modern jazz in the tradition of, you know, what's happening with some of the Bad Plus's music tonight is going to use these meta complex themes, like a BJ Iyer or someone, Jason Moran, using really dense polyrhythmic ideas. I think there's a lot more people out there that would like it if it was presented differently, or presented with people in the world promoting more cultural relevance in our artwork. So.
but is it fair to call it jazz anymore then?
No, I think it is fair, but again, it's the person that you're dealing with at the time. I mean, I don't mind being called a jazz musician. I like that, but I also don't mind being considered, you're not a jazz musician. I mean, fine, okay, I'm not, you know. I'm just a musician. That's great. But, I mean, if you were to have those categories, I feel there's a larger audience for jazz or creative music that is out there. And to be honest with you, it sometimes gets hurt by some of the more macking style or like compositions that are just sort of like vehicles for long solos and things. I can understand, and I know what's going on, and I can understand being disinterested and bored. I can totally understand that. You know, I won't name names, but I've been at festivals and shows, and I'm sure people have been bored with us too, but I've been at festivals and shows where I'm just dying of boredom watching some icons, you know what I'm saying? It's just sort of like, yeah, but this idea, this is going nowhere, and this is just like, no wonder people are bored and reading their programs, and, you know, like, and what's with this, like, pleated pants and Hawaiian shirts? You know what I mean? Like, truly, get it together, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not enough anymore to just be the best vibraphonist in the world or whatever. That's not a hint. That's not a hint. No, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you feel like you get hurt by that title then? I mean, like, I
feel that we absolutely have been hurt by it. Yeah, because we're a group that exists in the middle of that. You know, when we came out, we had a record called These Are the Vistas that sold an incredible amount of records for jazz. And it was a complex, dense record with all these different themes. It wasn't just a cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit, which is still like one of the most swinging. We had straight ahead critics calling it sounds like the Mal Waldron, you know, trio of today. It's like very swinging and very whatever. But if you just read an article and you see that, and you see that, you're thinking the Bad Plus is just going to roll in and play like 10 Nirvana tunes and go back to the hotel. It's ludicrous. Everyone in that band is a highly tuned, you know, like lover of all jazz movements, including very straight ahead music, you know. So, again, I feel that the moniker can stop people when it doesn't have to, you know. a ton of bad, boring jazz out there, and there's a ton of bad, boring pop music out there too. It's just like, you know what, just make your music compelling, and I'm sure some people will pay attention to it.
I was wondering, because I think that pretty much everybody here in the conservatory is looking to have their own voice and to make like something really creative. And I'm wondering if there was a time when you felt like you were really like paying dues to get to that place, or if if you were just like, I just have to go for it.
Yeah. No, there still are times, of course, but there were absolute times. I mean, we're in a very fortunate position now to be able to come here and play a concert for you guys tonight. It's a very fortunate. I've been on the other end of that for years, touring with 2 people at shows and trying to make the music play in front of anyone from my younger years to, you know, I can still take a new band out and barely get an audience sometimes in some places. But as far as paying dues, as far as playing all the music, of course, I played a lot of straight-ahead music and backed up people when they would come to town. I played a student ensemble. I didn't go to study music in school. I studied privately with people. My #1 teacher was a guy named Eric Gravatt, who was the first drummer of Weather Report, who luckily has lived in Minneapolis since the mid-'70s, but he was McCoy Tyner's drummer. He actually recently went back and played with McCoy the last like 6 years. He was out with McCoy Tyner. He was a prison guard for 25 years when I started taking lessons from him when I was 16 or 15. And he completely blew my perspective open of presence on the instrument and everything. I still think about it. In fact, I just saw him a week ago, and I told him after all these years, and we've run into each other on the road now, he was remarking that we had last seen each other in Africa, which is true. And I was like, wow, okay. We were in South Africa together at a festival, and he was with McCoy Tyner. And I'll tell you, it's a funny story because I came up to him. We were in the backstage area, and McCoy Tyner was standing there, you know, by the food, and he's just so stately and amazing, you know. And like I'm talking to Gravatt for a second, I'm like, what the fuck is this guy? He's eating our food, man. Who is this dude? And Gravatt's like, he took me seriously, and I was like, I'm going to say something because I want him out of here. And it's McCoy Tyner. I didn't think about that. Gravatt's like, no, don't. So anyway, that attitude feeds into a certain thing that you might see tonight. But anyway, sorry for swearing too. I'm sorry about that, Dean. Sorry about that. But anyway, he was my main teacher growing up, and I'm sorry. I think I even lost focus of your question. But what was it? What were we talking about?
I was asking you if you felt like you had to pay dues to get to the
Well, it's not about what you have to do and what you don't have to do. There are many ways of getting anywhere. I hate to say I hate when people say that in any form of education or power or whatever. You know, did they tell Jean-Michel Basquiat, you have to paint like the academic masters before you can make anything relevant? It's ridiculous. It's like, try to make a painting that looks like one of those Basquiat paintings sometimes. The closest person that's going to come to that is like a 4-year-old, and it's going to be amazing, you know what I mean? It's going to be in a museum. So it's a whole other skill set, and it sometimes doesn't have to do with paying your dues, going through like, I've got to play with Lee Konitz for 5 years and put up with all his shit. That's a true story. No. In order to be a relevant jazz musician. That's ridiculous. But I think you should try to play all music and try to play in any situation and play with older musicians that will come down on you sometimes. I think it's an important experience, you know, but it's not the only road. And people pay dues in many ways, you know what I mean? I paid, in my conversations with young jazz musicians or musicians from my era, like when I talked to Brad Meldau, we're talking about our 20s, I spent mine in a van playing in front of 3 people in Olympia, Washington, or wherever I was with Happy Apple and with all these other things, and I came, you know, playing with Carruthers and I playing together, you know, doing little tours or doing whatever, and no one's there, you know. I spent my early years being ignored, and Brad spent his early years being adored, you know what I mean? And now we're both at the same Brad Meldau trio, we do double bills, he's opened for us many times, you know what I mean? It doesn't mean we're better, it doesn't mean, what I'm saying is our experiences, we went through completely different channels, different life experiences completely. And you could look on paper and say, well, Brad is so brilliant, he just went up there and just did it. Well, of course, he worked so hard, but he didn't sleep on the floor at a Motel 6 for 6 years like I did. So it's a different experience completely, you know what I mean? So in many ways, yeah, pay dues however you want to pay them. Yeah.
How much, like, paying, I guess, again, with more paying dues, and before you were kind of saying the way that jazz as like a title and a genre is presented, how much do you think of that as maybe, I don't know if fault's the right word, but part of it is academia, and like, how do you have kind of an idea of how that can be kind of maybe changed if it is detrimenting to improvised music and things?
Again, the way that I feel it can be changed is if that's the experience, turn the experience of academia in jazz into something that it maybe should be, almost like the real modernist think tank like Cranbrook in Michigan, where they had all the great architects of the mid-century and furniture designers coming together under the guise of academia, and they're changing all the rules of modern architecture and furniture. In many ways, you can take this experience, I hope this is answering your question, and turn it into like a collective of people sharing ideas, and for the common goal is to maybe not satisfy the quota of people that are going to go out and know what chord, how to thread a solo with whatever, and to do all those things, which are important, but then you don't make that your life's work. Like, make sure you're taking in all the information, but then you're sharing the experience with each other, like this is a period of your life where you get to fail hard if you want to, So take advantage of that, instead of when you're 32 and you're still like the guy that can play all the things you are really great at the restaurant. I'm sorry, but I mean, I don't mean to make judgments, but if you don't take it and turn it into you teaching young people, or taking your expertise and doing whatever, but if your art statement is purely a jobbing jazz musician, you're not furthering the music, you're taking it down, in my opinion. And that seems a little hardcore, but, there aren't people going, I just want to spend the rest of my life playing Radiohead covers at wherever, you know what I mean? Like, with a band, with a singer, you know what I mean?
How come do you have a reason, or like a thought about why there aren't maybe standards in other genres of music? Like, why?
Exactly, that's what my point is. It's like, you don't go see Radiohead and go, you know what, man, I just don't hear Roy Orbison in this, you know what I mean? I'm just not hearing enough Roy, you know what I mean? Buddy Holly is not being represented here, fuck this. It's left to be its own thing. And it is its own thing. It's singular on the planet because of it. So, if you want to know why, maybe, in my opinion, why pop music is able to stretch out and have genres, multiple genres, and demand attention and all these things, from the best of it to the worst of it. Some of it is unbelievable, some of the rock music of today, and using gear in ways that's new. It's almost like rock is in a way that where you're hearing some future music, like using gear in very creative ways. And of course, some of it's, in my opinion, most of it's really banal and really short-sighted and driven by something else, like fashion or something else. But there's a lot of room in improvised music to do the same. We've always been trying to do it with every record and every project I'm in, is always trying to be outside the, whatever. But my point is like, decide at this time that you can take in the great knowledge of your mentors, your masters, and everything, and also be trading ideas and banding together. Because that's the best part of this experience that I didn't have, that I missed out on as a musician, was just having a peer group that was a little more like-minded, instead of just going into situations and being alone a lot of the time. And, of course that might have helped me in many ways, but in many ways it also was like, I really wish I could have had more and more. I probably would have developed even earlier into my own person if I would have had more people, the experience of more people around me, that I could have ensembles that I put together that focus on a certain composer or something that can help you branch out. Those are ways to do it too. Have your Albert Eiler ensemble, you know what I mean? Have you're able to have these ensembles that focus on more, rhythms from different parts of the world by someone who knows this stuff instead of by a book or something. Then that's like the best part of academia and jazz. The worst part, of course, is that you just churning out people that are not saying anything other than being able to, you know, do whatever. And it's no secret that the highest level people in music that went to music school were the ones that were already done by the first few years. They were just sort of like moved on to playing their music. So if you're going to go the whole way, you know, make the experience one of an experimental thing as well as like getting all of your knowledge together.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess along those sort of lines of, you know, something that, you'd kind of consider that as something, like a knowledge that you wish that you had before, like when you first started out in your early career, is there anything else that's like something that, you know, maybe even like a regret that you had that you wish somebody had told you about earlier on that you could share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, like I say, my advice again is to hold off on maybe recording your music and putting it out. I think that there's some early statements that I made in my tail end of my period of really like working towards something where some of it I think is really good and some of it I feel like I didn't need to force the issue too much. But you know what I mean? It's almost like that's what that period of your life is for. I really feel that your 20s, the idea that you're supposed to be somehow evolved and when you're 23 or something, when you're done with college or 24 is ridiculous. I really think that my whole 20s were the period of like really trying to figure things out. I really feel it's the same with all arts, unless it's really some strange, prodigious, like, I'll be like a Basquiat or something where they're 22 and it's to see the whole thing, even though it's a very criticized artist. But I use that as an example of somebody being so young. Because I think a lot of times the young jazz musicians, you know, you could say Tony Williams would be would be exempt. But for the most part, I think they're too lauded for individual virtuosity, and then just sort of like, here, you're a conceptualist, you're a whatever. It's just like when you graduate from school, you're supposed to be a person on the planet that is totally formed and knows exactly what you want and knows what you got to go and do and everything like that. And I just feel that in jazz and in improvised music, I think that unless it's like I say a Tony Williams where it comes around once in a billion years where you have a 17-year-old sounding like that, I mean, what is that all about? You know, that hasn't happened since. And I think we can all agree that many people believe that Tony Williams peaked in that period and was given all this stuff, and it didn't grow from beyond that, you know. It didn't. I personally like late period Tony Williams drumming, but I'm really in the minority there. I like when he changed his sound into really thuddy kind of black dot heads. You know, I'm into it because you can hear him under there, but the sound is very not kind of like what everyone wants to hear when they hear Tony doing his thing, you know. I kind of applauded that personally, but he's viewed as a peaking early type musician. The Bad Plus, we were in our early 30s when we first, that's 14 years for me into being out there playing and being rejected and playing sideman to people and playing jam sessions and playing whatever. And I'm 32 and signing to Columbia Records with the three of those guys with this total art concept, our precious art concept. Mm-hmm. But the point is, I was very thankful to walk into that position. Number one, did we walk in totally realize like we're going to do our own artwork, we're doing our music, we're going to record it our way with the people we want to record it with. We're not doing any of your Christmas records, we're not doing any of anything. Like seriously, like you're not going to see like the Bad Plus does Jingle Bells for blah, blah, blah. Because just check out how often that happens. You know what I mean? Yeah. The jazz figurehead that's Christmas record comes out, or that's tribute to Duke, or something, you know, that maybe they're not 100% in control of. But we were thankful that we were already 30-something and being a little bit like, you know, this is what we do, and you can do it, or you can put it out or not put it out, we don't care. And that's really, I think it's important in this music to stand with your stuff like that.
This is very strange.
I'm just going to talk until everyone leaves. It's so great. It's just you and I just sitting here. So, man, and so, you know, world rhythms are like... It's like 6 o'clock. We got... This is great. Seriously, we lose a few every time. I'm just like, please, it's like 2 people. Do you have another question? All right. Maybe just one or two more, yeah.
Yeah, so sort of a strange question, but something I've been wondering about a lot of musicians lately is what is it that you love about music? Why do you keep playing it, and what do you find inspirational and beautiful about music to make you keep coming back to it every time?
You know, that's a great question, because there are times when I'm reading about people in other disciplines, creativity, filmmakers, things that I'm inspired by, visual arts, furniture design, anything. I'm actually very into, and since I was a very young child, strangely, I don't think I've ever talked about this, but since I was very young, I've been very into interior decorating. This sounds very it's actually true. I used to rearrange the furniture in my house growing up, and my mom would just be like, wow, they come home and the furniture's all moved around, and I'm standing there looking at the way my brothers, I come from a family of 4 boys, and my brothers are all just very angry at me for needing the pillows to be a certain way on the sofa. It's true. So I tend to read a lot of interior decorating magazines and design magazines, not just this sort of new, everyone's into modernism now. I was really into it when a lot of those chairs were in dumpsters and things like that. I was 17 going around dumpsters trying to find an Eames chair or something. You know what I mean? So my point is that I'll read about different disciplines, and I'll always think to myself, I always think wow, this person really sounds like they've got it going on, and they really know what they're doing, and got their designs out there in their business. And I never equate the fact that I, in my world, have the same output. My records are out there, I'm trying to make my statements, I'm able to tour my music and do whatever. And I start to realize that it's so much a part of my waking being that I don't even think about it as something that I do with my life. It just is my thing. And I know that sounds sort of I am the music, and very Eastern Zen, I'm the Zen poet of drums. It's something that I identify with, though, so much as a part of what I'm doing here, that everything else would seem even though I'm very interested in other things, everything else seems just an interest that I like and that I'm very passionate about, but music exists completely outside that. At the end of the day, that's just why I'm here, and I realize that that's why I'm supposed to be doing this. No matter how hard it gets at times, and it does get very hard. It does get, no matter what level you're at, you think the pain goes away of your self-examination, the pressure of getting people to hear the music, to putting up with criticism, to trying to make a living, to all those things. They're always going to be there, so it's important to love it more than you love doing anything else. And again, identifying with how much it reflects as who you are. And that can be hard too, because then when you feel like you're not playing well, then you think no one will like you as a human being. There's a weird world in there that creates insecurity in all artists. That is, we all have gone through where it can get really weird, because you might see a musician you don't like and just discount them completely as a human being, which is very scary, and it can happen to you, and does happen to you. And so, it's a weird area, sensitive place, and to be in. You must want it more than anything. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I guess kind of going along the same lines. I mean, you become I would say even you out of the whole Bad Plus collective, because you're in all these other groups. I mean, there's total fanboys of you, in particular. And how do you deal with one, being in a group for 12 years now, or the Bad Plus, and how long, and all the CDs you put out, and keep on producing these new concepts and these new fresh sounding complete albums, and how do you deal with the pressure of that, and having to constantly be trying to, now that you have this name, live up to that name.
Yeah.
And then as an individual also, how do you deal with those pressures of having people that totally idolize you, want to sound like you, and then meeting them and handling that interaction.
Right.
I mean, then realizing that if you can change the whole life from that point on. I mean, that's a
Yeah, I mean, I
daunting
think
thing.
about this every now and again. I don't think about it too much, to be honest with you. I think one of the keys is that I'm very self-critical, believe it or not. I think that and I don't mean in a destructive way, like a self-hatred zone. I mean, I truly don't view myself as some of the accolades that you can get. I enjoy hearing that people are moved by the music. I tend to not think of myself as the person in that position receiving the praise
Mhm.
or and also, you know, what sucks is I'll take the criticism but not the praise. And that can be difficult. You know, I've detailed stories of standing ovations, and then you see the one person sitting down, and I just focus on the one person sitting down. Like, whoa. Whoa, that person hates me, you know, walking back backstage. Like, you know, no, I mean, it's not that bad, but there's some part of you that's like, you want to reach everyone in a way that you've been reached. And so, you know, there is a pressure in that, like, you know, people are showing up wanting to hear, but the pressure isn't that I really believe, like, I've got to just, like, you know, show off and make sure everyone knows I'm, like, what everyone talks about or something like that. For me, it's much more, I want to try and make something new, go for something new every time, or refine, and not refine in a way that's restrictive, but refine what I'm trying to do every night. I'm actually a person that will write down set lists that we played, and I go over what we did the next day. In fact, I did a 3-week tours with Tim Byrne, saxophonist, very iconoclastic free jazz saxophonist. We did 3-week tours in Europe where we improvised an entire concert. Me and it's this group called Buffalo Vision. And we did this where you're improvising literally a 90-minute concert, right? So you do it for like no days off. And it's hardcore, like. So you're 17 shows in at the highest level. You got people paying to see it. You're at the highest level of improvising musicians. Hank Roberts was in the band, Bill Frisell's famous thing. And I remember a few times thinking, man, I've got nothing left to say. Like standing there, like just like before a show, just like, wow, you know, it's not as easy as just phoning in some free jazz, you know. It's like I wanted to make something every night, you know, that was different, and I also didn't want to force any issues and everything like that. I was really learning, also being with Tim, how he is indifferent from performance to the next, and I'm someone that like memorize. I can hear the concert back when I'm done. It's almost like the photographic. Remember, they have a term for that when you can. So I would sit there and talk to him about everything we did in an improvised concert. Like, I was remember about 24 minutes in when we went into this, and I would detail it for him. And he just sit there looking at me like, wow. He said, man, I don't remember a thing, and I really don't want to. He say, like, I realize that I'm very, like, I care very deeply about, you know, this aesthetic idea, and no matter how out it is or how pure it is, I still want it to be something that I would really appreciate. And so the pressure is there for me every time, no matter what. Tonight there will be pressure, not like nervous or destructive, or like I said, I don't get self-critical like, oh, you suck. I have many times, but I do get into a place where I just, you know, I want to pull something new from this. And I never am thinking about, because they deserve it, you know, it's me. I'm the one sitting there at the end of the day, like, you know, so I don't take in that thing. Like, it feels great, but I actually don't go back to my hotel. Like last night, we played in Detroit and sold out the show. People were driving from Cincinnati, meeting people that said they were driven in from wherever, you know, playing Detroit is packed, it's like whatever. And I didn't go backstage. The band doesn't go backstage and like high five each other and like, yeah. And I go back to my room like, man, this is great. You know, I think in the nature of the whole thing is that we all go back and go, yeah, okay, cool, yeah, okay. We got into some of that stuff there, and then I go back to my room and I think about it a little bit. You know, I don't think about meeting the people saying that they drove all that way. I do love that, and anyone would love that, but especially as a creative musician or it's very beautiful to have somebody stake, because you realize the stakes are high. People are being moved more than just going to a Maroon 5 show or something. I mean, for real, this is like real artwork you're trying to give people, and if you believe in the power of it, it is something you want people to take in and be changed by. But then you can't put yourself in that exalted position, that's all I'm saying, of like, they're going to be so inspired by me that they're going to sound like me and they want to be me. Because, I mean, ultimately, I don't feel that that's happening. You know what I mean? And I never, like, walking away going, I mean, this year I was on the cover of the magazine Modern Drummer. That was a shock to me as much as it was a shock to, I'm sure, quite a few people that read Modern Drummer. But my point is like, that was like, wow, really? You really want to? And this guy had seen me play for 5 years repeatedly in New York, and I thought, this must be leading to something. He keeps coming out, and then it became this, oh man, you're like the iconoclastic lunatic of blah, 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 and all this stuff, and I never think about that at all, or the Stanley Crouch comment. I just walked away from that going, man, I need to learn myself to be more open, you know, to be less judgmental or whatever, believe it or not. So, does that answer your question,
Yeah.
sort of? Or I don't know how to answer some of those questions, but it feels great. I don't feel the pressure, though, from people as much as I feel for myself, you know. All right. Anyway, thank you. I hope to see you tonight.
Hey, thank you.